Okay, let's let in our guests. It's a beautiful day, so it's going to be interesting to see how many people come in out of this gorgeous sunshine. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gabbing About Gardening. Today, our guest is Mike Gall, who is on beautiful Quadra Island today. What's the weather like there, Mike?
Well, we're looking at 22 degrees, bright and sunny. Everything's starting to get dry already, which is amazing. Not quite dust dry, but it's getting dry out there.
I noticed it's getting dry. So your topic is super timely in so many ways. We'll give people an opportunity to get settled in a bit, Mike, and then I will make you co-host. Hello and welcome. And I know you have a fabulous presentation for us today. You are the pond guy. I always think of you like that. I hope that's okay.
Well, we've talked about it enough times, haven't we?
Well, you've not only taught me so much, but I know that everyone who has an opportunity to talk with you always wants to get your advice about how to make the best pond. And every location is different, isn't it?
Oh, it's remarkable. So I probably on Quadra, I wouldn't call it consulting so much as just going out and working with folks trying to enhance their ideas, probably on a dozen or more pond projects. And I love doing that because I find I'm learning a lot as well, which is really great.
Well, that makes sense. And you're also really involved in fire safety, fire smart, food security. Seem to have a lot of interest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gabbing About Gardening. We're going to give people a few more minutes. It's not even 3:30 yet, Mike. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Monday afternoon. I'm on Cortez Island in the Salish Sea. Mike Gall is joining us from his lovely home on Quadra Island, where he has created several ponds and has helped other people really pretty much all around the country create ponds. You do consult with people all over the place, don't you, Mike?
It's more local, we'll say, but no, I've talked to lots of folks in different parts of Western Canada, not so much in Ontario. And yeah, it's a fascinating process because as we were describing earlier, every situation is so unique and every person's need is unique. But I like it because it ties in all of those things that I've had a keen interest in, like the fire department and the fire smarting and all sorts of things. We're going to touch on all of that as well.
Yes, we are. And you'll have lots of time. You have created a fabulous presentation for us. We'll give people a few more minutes to come in out of this amazing weather and join us. Honestly, I didn't have much of an idea of how many people would actually pull themselves out of the garden, Mike. But I think, we've got 13 gardening souls so far. That is not a bad start. That's wonderful. Thank you for joining us, everyone. My name is Lucretia Shan-Farber. Please call me Lou. And our guest today on Gabbing About Gardening is Mike Gall. And I call Mike the pond guy. He teaches so many people in our communities so much about ponds, why to have ponds, how to work with the terrain and the landscape that you have. And Mike is going to be starting his presentation in just a few minutes. I'll make you co-host in a few minutes, Mike, and then we'll get started with your presentation. Again, welcome everyone to Gabbing About Gardening. My name is Lou, and we'll get started in a few minutes. I just want to remind everyone that Gabbing About Gardening is based on the gift economy. And so whatever you donate goes towards a cause that our speaker is keen on. Mike, I know you're a permaculturist, so I hope you'll be happy to know that whatever funds are raised today will go to Perma Youth, which is an organization. It teaches kids from 11 to 17 all around the world about the principles of permaculture. And I know you're a big permaculture guy. I hope that meets your approval.
Well, whoa, what was that? Yeah, that absolutely meets me. Catching them young and exposing them to those ideas early, it's just the best way, you know. Working on a few projects for a demonstration, for example, of a power system at our local school here using solar panels. And I mean, there's no way that the system that we're hoping to put up there would power the school, but as an educational tool for young people to carry that through to the rest of their life and understanding how they can do things a little bit better, maybe a little greener. It's a fantastic opportunity. And so is permaculture as a design system, for sure.
That's fabulous. Now, just tell us briefly how you got into permaculture and especially your focus on ponds. We'll give people just another 3 minutes or so to join us, and then I will turn the screen over to you, Mike. But in the meantime, would you tell us how all this happened for you?
Well, it started in Alberta, believe it or not, and one of the properties that we had there, it was a 2-acre property, and my wife decided that she was going to go off onto a permaculture design certification course in the interior of British Columbia. Disappeared for a couple of weeks, came back, and she started doing this amazing gardening process that I didn't understand and hadn't taken the time to understand, but busy with work, that sort of thing. Then as we moved across the country out to Ontario and out there, we carried those principles forward. And, you know, I know in my bio that you wrote, you were very generous in saying that I designed, I'm kind of the gatekeeper of doing all the heavy work. But most of the stuff was Carol's design initially. Once we got here to Quadra about 13 years ago, that's when I pursued my Permaculture Design Certification through Geoff Lawton. And it was a mind opener. I mean, it blew my mind. So that's how I got involved in it. And one of the things that, you know, it was like a whole 2-week segment was on designing water systems, water capture systems, and how do you do that? And I think it was around the same time that we had an incredibly dry summer that year. And I thought, no, this is something I got to do. And so that's where my attention really peaked, and implementing some of those ideas. A lot of it works for, we'll say, Australia a little bit better, but you can carry through, and it's all about observation and seeing all the different ways of putting things together. So
right. Well, yeah, that's the beauty of permaculture, is you really learn to observe and understand where you are in a whole different way. And thanks for setting the record straight and giving Carol that shout out. But the fact of the matter is, many people do depend on you, Mike Gall. You are the pond guy on Quadra Island. People really look to you for advice whenever they're starting to build a pond. I know my husband Lee and I have talked to you several times about it. So we'll get started in just a moment. Again, this is Gabbing About Gardening. We're gabbing about pond possibilities with Mike Gall today. Mike is a permaculture designer who specializes in creating beautiful, efficient, useful ponds. And I want to shout out to our sponsors. We now have a couple of wonderful sponsors. Speedy Bin, Joyce from Speedy Bin will help you choose just the right compost bin for yourself and for your situation. I love Speedy Bin. We have several of them, and they are rat-proof, raccoon-proof, and even dog-proof, not bear-proof perhaps, but we fortunately don't have too much of that problem. Also, thank you to the Quadra Island Garden Club, the Cortez Island Garden Club, and the Campbell River Garden Club, all of whom are helping to sponsor the Gabbing About Gardening free Zoom weekly. Our guest today is Mike Gall, the pond guy. And Mike, thank you so much for being here. We have 23 gardening souls who have come in from this beautiful weather to hear what you have to share with us. I am going to make you co-host. Are you ready to take over and start your screen share and your presentation?
I can do that as soon as you give it to me.
Great. Okay, I've handed you the reins, Mike. Once again, right. Mike Gall, the pond guy from Quatre Island.
All right, one moment, please, while I press all the buttons.
Yes.
And here we go. That come up?
Now, yes. I just need to be able to see when we have people coming in. I think I still can. Yeah, that looks great, Mike.
All right, so I just want to check with you, Lou. I've got some, so I have people's faces on the right-hand side. Do they see the whole screen?
I think that everyone can change their view for themselves.
Sean, can you see the whole screen? Okay, got it.
Great.
Good. So, Lou, I'll just get started here. And I just want to say that it's not just about ponds. It's about the essentials of water security. So I've got a PowerPoint presentation that I'll share with you. And then I'm not sure how long that'll take, 20 minutes maybe. And then that's going to cover a lot of ground. And then I've got a slide presentation, which I'll pop up later. And it shows some of the projects that I've had a chance to participate in. And yeah, it's really quite fun, but there's some really good stuff coming. So also, thank you very much, Lucretia, for this opportunity, because I'm pretty excited to share some of these ideas and concepts with you. So as my wife would always tell you, I love to experiment. She tells me, excuse me, not tells you, that I love to experiment. And everything I do, sometimes it's 2 or 3 times before I get it right. I wish I was a better planner, but sometimes I'm not. And what I like to do is try and layer as many functions and purposes into a particular project, trying to get more than one particular use out of something that I'm trying to put together. And what I found over the years is that if I get 2 or 3, sometimes even 4 different purposes in a particular project, that's the one that really takes traction. If I'm only doing something for one purpose, it usually falls to the wayside over time. Now, nature has been perfecting systems for about 2 billion years. And it's in the last 10,000 years or so that man has really started to create agriculture and do all sorts of things that lately, persistently, has interfered with how nature operates. So the process of permaculture is monitoring how nature would do something and then mimicking those natural systems as much as possible. And what that does, it creates a very effective design. It creates wide diversity because you are building in many layers to the project. And it also creates a tremendous amount of abundance of food or shelter or what have you. It's just, it's a much better way of taking a look at things. So why would you want a pond system? And water security is critical, especially as we go forward in the future here and the environment has its effects. Without the blue stuff, you won't get the green stuff and you won't get the brown stuff, or maybe it's the other way around. But the point being is that you have to have water and you have to have enough of it to do a good job. Now, one of the systems that I'm playing around with right now are storage tanks, and they're really great to have. but they do have limitations just because they're not that big. And if you do a lot of gardening, you'll recognize how much water you'll go through in a particular period, especially our dry summers here. So I do like storage tanks, and there's ways of making them better, and I'll talk about that later. But it's ponds that really have the volume of water for a multitude of purposes that work really well. Now on Quadra, we have 7-8 months of liquid sunshine, and it keeps coming, and it's an abundance of it for sure. And in the summer months, we can go sometimes, I think the worst I've experienced is 9 straight weeks without a drop of rain. And so very important to capture that rainfall that's free to us and store it for when we actually need it. We're blessed with both above ground and below ground water, which is something that not many of the islands can actually say. You know, you go down to places like Denman or Hornby, and they have huge water security issues because there just isn't a sufficiently sized aquifer. Now, I've got a whole section that's dedicated to a little bit about the aquifer here in Quadra because it is unique, but it also potentially has been threatened. So we need to take a look at that too. Whoops. Why am I not moving? There we go. So what are the benefits and the uses for for a pond system? Of course, domestic irrigation to supply and grow our food with. Something that's very important to me is the water source for fire suppression. Fire departments love it when you have an actual pond nearby. Here in Quadra, we don't have hydrants. If you are from Quadra, you would know that. And so what we have to do is when the fire truck, the pumper truck rolls up, we have to deploy a 2,000 gallon, it looks like a giant kiddie pool, but it holds 2,000 gallons worth of water. And then the water trucks cycle from wherever they're picking the water up, driving to the location, dumping their water, and then going back out and get it. And in the course of a fire, they could easily go through 8,000 to 10,000 gallons of water. And that's not a wildfire, that's just a regular fire. So if you live in a rural setting like we do, that's typically how the fire departments have to operate. So if they can roll up on scene and have access to a pond that holds 50,000 gallons worth of water, they're going to be able to do their job a lot more effectively without ever running out. Now here's a use. Remember, we're layering in all the different uses, but compost. So our pond system that we have here on this property, all kinds of natural green vegetation grows in the water, duckweed and stuff like that. And basically, every so often when there's an accumulation of it, I'll go paddle out in my little rowboat and get buckets, and I'll scoop that up and put it into the buckets, and then I transport that up to the gardens where Carol has her gardens. And we use that as an amendment to the soil. And it's unbelievably fertile with all kinds of things that the plants just love. So you don't ever worry about spreading weeds when you take plants from water and put them on your garden. It's quite a natural system. Habitat improvement. So surprising to me, I didn't realize how much the animals are attracted to water, just like humans are. As a quick example, we had a full-fledged, mature bald eagle, and for 2 years, he would come and he'd land right on top of one of the prominences that we have built, and then he would hop down to the water's edge and he would drink the water. I have got a muskrat swimming around in our pond. Wild ducks, wood ducks, all kinds of ducks are always coming in and landing. They don't stay, probably because there's a little too much activity, but from a habitat improvement perspective, ponds are fantastic. And then recreation. I mean, we use the ponds all the time, all summer. We have one pond that's dedicated for swimming. And it's just a great spot to hang out on a hot day and then jump in the water, cool off. We couldn't afford waterfront property when we bought our land, but we decided to make it. So it's kind of fun. And then the aesthetics of it. Your eyes are constantly drawn to water, and just as a natural system. And it's fantastic to watch how it changes. And if you're worried about real estate value, anybody who has a decent pond system built, well, they've improved their proper value by some magnitude. I wouldn't pretend to say how much, but it always makes a piece of property more preferred. So as we go forward and we're starting to see the rise in food prices, we're starting to see breakdowns in the supply chain systems coming out of Mexico and California and stuff for our food. There's a heightened need for food security. And based on that, there's a heightened need for water security because you won't be able to grow your food without it. Also, our aquifers are at risk with more development. Here on this island, there's particular areas of higher concentration development that are happening and or planned to have happen. And the aquifers are the water systems that we draw from that are underground. And in the case of Quadra, there appears to be that there's 3 different layers. And so shallow wells would exist in that top layer. Then we hit a hard pan that's sometimes 20 feet underground, sometimes 10 feet underground, sometimes 50 feet underground. But it's what holds the water up closer to the surface. Then that hard pan extends for a certain distance. And then there's this huge area of sand, which acts as a fantastic filter to provide really high quality drinking water. And then there's another hard pan. And these are all created by the glaciation that came and went, packing down the soil from the weight of the glaciers and then creating that hard pan. But the layers that are underneath that are loose sand, basically. Quadra sands is what it's called. And that's where the water is stored, and it's good quality water. When you get down to the 3rd layer, it's often, there are chances that it's been contaminated in some way with naturally occurring things that would make the water less potable, if you will. But it's quite important to recognize that these aquifers, they exist because they've stored the water over a long period of time. And as we concentrate the development here, we take more of that water out. It's the same thing as some of the ancient aquifers down in California or in central United States, where they're actually draining them for agricultural purposes, and they're gonna run out of water or potentially run out of water. So we have to take a look at that. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later, I think. And what do the repetitive dry seasons that we're getting affect the aquifer's recharge capability? Because there's a natural process for recharging those aquifers. As we do more development, how much of that water is not actually being able to get down to the aquifers to recharge them because of roads or diversion. So we have to be a little conscientious about that. And one of the projects that I hope to work on, we'll see if it happens, is we want to do, for the southern part of Quadra Island at least, a geohydrological survey with the work of a professor from the University of British Columbia. And what we hope to find out is exactly what is the carrying capacity of each of those aquifers and what is the water quality. So we'll find that out. When you do have a pond system, you're going to stress your domestic well a lot less. That's really important because if you use the natural water systems where you collect the water, you're not using the water from your well system. And that is a good thing based on some of the things I just talked about. And then there's a number of passive above ground water storage systems. Again, a little further in the presentation that I'll get into in depth. Why does that not work? Okay, here we go. Now, from a fire suppression perspective, ponds are clearly your biggest ally. And it's not just for suppressing a house fire, in particular wildland fires. And one of the things that I want to talk about a little bit is a home sprinkler protection system. And just about every household could build one if they chose to. And basically what these are is it's just really highly efficient sprinklers that soak the roof of your structure, and maybe some regular sprinklers out on the periphery. And what you're doing is you're soaking the entire area around the house as far out as you can, and creating a really high humidity bubble over top of that structure. And what that does is as a wildland fire, which could be miles away from where you're located, as the firebrands come in, they hit the wetted structure and they just extinguish. If you don't have something like that, then you have to count on something called Fire Smart, and that's preparations that you do ahead of time in a passive, it's a passive system, and you're eliminating as many of the combustibles as possible around your home. So those are things to think about as far as fire suppression. But if you have a pond, you're going to be able to do great things to protect your property. And I also have some more information about that a little further on. So one of the projects that I got familiar with, we'll say, was the desire by a homeowner for some additional microhydro. Now, he was uniquely situated so that he had enough drop from the pond, enough vertical drop, that he could actually put in a Pelton wheel to generate power during the winter months. On Quadra, there's about 4 months, 5 months of the year where you can generate a suitable amount of power off of a photocell system. The problem is in the wintertime, you just don't get it. We're cloudy, you're a lot of rain happening, that sort of thing. So photocells just don't seem to do all that well. So by having a microhydro system, if that were possible, you would be able to extend that period significantly. So it depends how much of a need you feel to be off grid, but there's another reason for it, that a pond can, in a proper placement, can do a lot for you. When you're doing your design, you want to also make sure that you have safe exit points and safe entry points. So if part of your design process includes recreation, then ideally what you would really like to have is shallow entry points. A lot of people will dig ponds with very vertical walls. Well, it makes it almost impossible to get out. You don't want to have your pond become a drowning pool. It's just a really bad idea. But besides that, then you have your throw lines with a float or some sort of mechanism to get people out. And in the worst case scenario, or best case, depending what the situation is, you might want to think about having fencing as a bit of a barrier if you have small children and stuff. Docks, floats, ledges for plants, the exits, it's all part of your design. The wildlife that's drawn, I think I described that earlier, like I would never have expected to see a muskrat show up in our pond. And he's quite a piece of entertainment. The other thing is that the ponds change with the seasons tremendously. So it provides a great opportunity for observing things that are happening in and around your property, meditation, the swimming potential, boats, fun in the sun. Everybody loves hanging out by the pond. In non-COVID times, our yard is the one that's busy. We get lots of folks coming in, jumping in the pond and swimming around. And all of the relatives, they love to show up as well. And let's hope that we can do that again soon. All I'll say about this particular slide is that the cost of installing a pond doesn't have to be that high. And the cost, I can guarantee you, will far outweigh what it does in terms of increasing your potential property value. So, you know, you just think about all these different layers that we put in there, purpose and reason for a pond. This would be the last one that I would worry about. But at the same token, it has some of the best financial reward around it. And a naturalized pond, something that doesn't take very much input to maintain, it's just not that expensive, and you don't have to do much with it after the fact. One thing to keep in mind though is that when you design the pond and the depths of it and that sort of thing, you have to, like, a pond automatically starts eutrophying the second you dig it. So the water fills up, leaves fall in, pollen, all sorts of things. And eventually that pond will reduce in size. But so that's part of the design, is trying to make it just a little bit bigger than what you think. I think of Lucretia's place, and she's got a beautiful pond. It's not that deep, but it was immediately surrounded by the red alder. I mean, it's beautiful, but you know, you have to sort of figure out what's the purpose for the pond, and then how am I going to best manipulate that. And you don't have to do a pond project all at once. I'll show you pictures later of a gentleman who did his pond project, and what he does is he saves up a certain amount of money, knows how much he'll be able to how much digging he'll be able to get done for that. He gets that part done, and then he works on that smaller project. Then he saves up a little bit more money, and 2-3 years down the road, he's dug another pond, and he attaches them and connects them. And what he's created is just pure art. It's a most incredible experience to see what he's done. I've got pictures of that I'll show you later. So in the design phase of your pond, you got to decide what its purposes are, because if it's recreation, you're going to design it slightly different. If it's strictly for irrigation, you'll do it differently again. So sort of having some good concepts as to how you want to make use of that pond area, that's number one step. Then take your time in the site selection. Just because you want the pond in location X doesn't mean that's actually the best place to put your pond. Just because that's the easiest place for you to dig doesn't mean that's where you should put the pond. You have to take the cues from nature. And so some of those things are looking at the spots on your property that are the last to dry out, number one, or do they hold water naturally for any period of time. Plants that will tell you that something's happening over there that's different than another area would be things like skunk cabbage, canary grass, ferns, red alder, cedars, that sort of thing. Those are all your cue plants to tell you that this could be a good area. Doesn't mean it's the right one, but it could be a good area. And a great example is on our lower pond system. You could walk anywhere in that forest at the time, and there would be skunk cabbage all over the place, right in the middle of the forest. So we knew that those were pretty wet areas. Then you have to take your topographics into consideration. What's the slope and angles, and what is the potential capture area for water to naturally egress into the pond that you want to dig? And sometimes you have to look well beyond your property boundaries. You might even need to look a little bit at the neighbor's property. You wouldn't want to dig a pond on the downside of a feedlot. That would be a really bad idea. You don't want to dig a pond where stuff that's flowing from another location winds up in your pond, like a septic field. So, you got to sort of scope it out a little bit. So inflow, outflow. And for a good pond, you do have to have both. Stagnant water is a little bit trickier to manage, not impossible, but you do want to have some inflow and outflow at some point. And it doesn't have to be all the time. It can be seasonal. Now, I'll spend more time on the next two concepts, keyline and edge effect, a little later in the presentation, but keyline is just really a system where if you find a draw of land and it's sloping down towards something, you walk down that and you're on the heel of your foot first and then the ball of your foot. The heel of your foot first, then the ball of your foot. And at that moment when all of a sudden you're on your toes first and then your heel next, that's a key point in the draw where would be a really good spot to put a pond. So that should go into the design, and you can add all kinds of stuff to it, like swale lines and ditches and all sorts of things to help create the best environment to collect water. And then edge effect, and I'll also spend, sorry, I keep saying this, but edge effect is something that's very important. And conceptually, I'll just throw it out there that, let's take, for example, you have a garden bed and you've got rows of stones that are marking the boundary between, say, grass and the garden bed, you know, like a small raised bed. What you'll notice is that it's along those edges that things grow the most prolifically. So the grass along that edge grows very quickly, and it's because the water sheds off of those little rocks and collects right along that edge. Plus the rocks act as a natural heat sink, and they warm up that ground a little bit earlier. So it's usually along the edges that things grow the best. If you think about North America, and you look at, it's the coastal regions where you have the most prolific growth, and it's for something along those lines, the same thing. Ponds are very similar. The wicking action of the soil sucks the water in, and it can travel up to 10 feet inside of where the edge of the pond starts and where you have your plantings and that sort of thing. So it's along those edges that you get your most prolific growth. So you want to maximize that. If you're trying to grow food and make the best of it, you don't want to just have a round circle. You want to have something that has a meandering line to the edge, because now you're making that edge much larger. And the first thing that I recommend anybody who's picked a site to put their pond and wants to see if it'll work for them is dig a test trench and dig as deep as you can. You can do it with a machine, or you can do it even with a shovel. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be something that identifies where the water table is, if it's a wet area, and then how much does that water table fluctuate up and down. So test trench is really important, and you might want to sit on it for a year. In fact, our test trench sat for 2 years while I monitored the spot where I thought our first pond would go. And I was pleasantly surprised to find that I didn't lose more than about 8 inches worth of water from where it started in the spring to where it ended at the dry period. And then what's the materials that are underneath? Clay, gravel, silt, sand, mud, alluvial deposit. It all makes a difference in how you manage that pond to prevent it from leaking, because they all leak. So this is something I just started working on, is trying to understand what the water rights in British Columbia are. And it's actually in a state of flux from what we can tell. Like, there are new rules and things coming in to play. And you have to think of water rights in 2 different ways. So there's wells, and, you know, hole in the ground that you draw water from. And that's what you're getting your water from the aquifer from. And then there's ponds, which it's basically surface water. You've dug a hole in such a way that you're exposing surface water, or I should say the water table. And that sort of is a little bit of a gray area. But I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to say that 100%. What I will say is that as long as you don't interrupt the natural flows of water from one area to another, if you're in a watershed, so for example, we have our watershed goes into a creek that's off the back of our property, but the water that I've exposed, it's the same amount of water coming into my pond as what's going out. And therefore, it's not really interfering with anything from a natural perspective. Just for a point of discussion, water rights in BC right now, they want all domestic water users, they would like you to register your well. And the logic behind that is first in line in terms of registration, first to rights. So if you register your well ahead of your neighbors and there's ever a water issue, you would have access to your water in your well before your neighbor would have access to your water. It's not required to register the well at this time, but it'll probably be so in the future. It's recommended so that you get into this process. However, all of this is sort of, it's been about, from my understanding, it's been about a 10-year process where they're trying to get the legislation right. And we've been in touch with a lawyer and professor from University of Victoria, who's helping us go through that. Because what we're trying to do here is hopefully, I hope anyways, create an environment where we can change this first in line to first in rights type mentality and try to share this resource equally amongst all of the people on Quadra. So just something for you to consider. Now, the Ministry of Health manages the drinking water quality after it's out of the well, which is completely different than the Ministry of Lands, Forests, and Natural Resources. So you can't confuse the two. Luckily, at this point, ponds are, like I say, are a bit of a gray area. You probably won't get into a lot of trouble. If you're really concerned, you can contact the Ministry of Lands, Forests, and Natural Resources and just see what they want you to do. Yeah, I think that covers that. I just want to reiterate, I'm not a lawyer, so don't hold me to it. So construction of the pond, and I've got quite a few slides in the picture segment that talk or show exactly some of these things that I'm talking about, but decide on the shape of your pond. I highly recommend creating as much edge space as possible and create ledges and things in the pond design so that you can plant plants along the sides, even if you have a deep segment. Our first pond is approximately 18 feet deep. The second pond is in and around 12 feet deep. The two are connected, and I estimate at something well in excess of 1 million liters of water of storage in those two pond systems. But in that process, our first pond didn't have much edge space, and so it limited how much we could utilize it for growing food. So the second pond, little better design. Remember, I like to do things 2 or 3 times. We've got a lot of edge space, and there's lots of plants, and there's many benefits, which I'll get into, of why you want plants in the water. Also, when you're doing your design, you have to think about it ahead of time. Do you want any specialized water features like waterfalls and rocks and so on? And in the third pond, we actually built a waterfall system to be part of the aeration of the water to try and increase the oxygen level so we would get less algae bloom. And it turned out that wasn't all that necessary. It was the plants that made the difference, but we still have a waterfall feature, which meant I had to get a little power out there and all kinds of stuff. And then if you're running pumps, again, you got to get some power down there. Pumps can be run on solar quite easily, actually. But that's usually, believe it or not, more expensive than just running a in-ground power line down to a spot, depending on the distance that you have to go. So keep all of that in mind. And then when you want to start the dig, the machine size means a lot, the access for the machine, and then material movement, because don't forget, you look at the pond and it's just a hole, right? Well, out of that hole came a whole bunch of dirt, and you got to do something with it. Also, are you in a cleared area or in a treed area? And it's not necessarily true that you want to be in a clear area, because sometimes it's a treed area that holds most of the moisture. One of the things that happens is that if you look at a tree, it's really, I mean, it's a beautiful thing and all, but it's a vertical column of water. The tree is filled with a great amount of water. When you take trees away from a space, they actually, there's a lot more water that goes into the ground. So it's something you can consider. And oh my God, is there a lot of fill that comes out of a hole for a pond? It's crazy how much dirt comes out and what you have to do with it after. If you want to make a pond build real expensive, real fast, try carting all of that fill away. It would be, depending on the pond, it could be hundreds of dump trucks worth. So making good use of that fill in other creative ways is a far superior method. And again, know that water source and know that exit. So in our situation, on the lower pond in particular, I have 3 different seeps that are running down a topography towards the pond. And underneath that is the hard pan. And so it's mostly just surface water that's traveling along that thoroughfare, if you will, from 3 or 4 different locations and filling the pond. But beyond that, like when the pond was dug and it hadn't filled with water yet, the water was just sort of percolating very slowly, not artisanally, but just percolating very slowly out of the ground. So there was water coming up and there was water going in. It still took a long time to fill, but yeah. Sight lines, I'm pretty particular about making the view as good as I can. Like I said, I couldn't afford waterfront, so I want to make sure that from a natural focus perspective that my eyes are drawn to specific things. So one of the things that's just off our property is probably one of the largest trees on Quadra Island. It's a giant old snag that the base of it is probably 6 or 7 feet across in diameter. It's just huge. And the top is broken off. And that's where the eagles built their nest, of course. So that's always kind of fun. So I wanted to be able to see that just for entertainment value. So I made sure that the sight line was there with that pond design, that I could actually see that. So as I said, unfortunately, every pond will leak a little bit. And it's about trying to come up with solutions that balance that and reduce it as much as possible. However, if you don't mind that your pond is really naturally full in the, right after the spring in the wet season, and it drops 3 or 4 feet, and that's okay by you, then fine, you don't have to do anything. But there are situations, which I'll tell you about, where a pond could carry some water, but then just completely disappears into the landscape. So you want to come up with solutions. So the first one's a very old one. It's called gleaning. And it was prevalent in the, I'm going to say 15th, 16th century. And a property owner would have 2 or 3 different kind of holes or collection points for water. And they couldn't keep water in all of them at the same time. So they would let one go fallow. Then they would run their animals in there, like their goats and their pigs and all that. And the combination of the manure and the nice tight little hoofs would compress the soil and the biomaterial and actually wind up sealing the pond. And then those animals would be moved out of that. The other one would be drained. That one would be filled up. And they just kept cycling the animals year after year that way, and managed to store water. Because guess what? We've been trying to store water for centuries. Another technique is using sodium bentonite. Now, sodium bentonite really is just a type of clay. It's often used in well drilling because what happens when you spread sodium bentonite down a shaft, it expands by about 10 times its volume as it receives moisture, and it seals any hole. It gets drawn in that well system into the holes or cracks that might be there. And so it's often used in the drilling industry as well. It's extremely slippery. It's like, excuse my language, goose poop. It's just slippery, but it's quite effective. If you know you have a pond that's definitely going to leak, you're best to apply sodium bentonite in the early stages before it even fills up with water. And what you do is you get bags of this stuff and you shake it out and then spread it out and mix it into the soil. And then as the pond fills up, it expands and it fills any crack. And it can work pretty good. But one of the projects was a gentleman, I won't say where, but he had leaks for sure. And he tried everything. So the thing that he did, which was pretty clever, he got a hold of this product, which is a liquid ionic polymer suspension. And because of its we went out with a fire pump and a hose, and we sprayed this thing for hours, this suspension. It's totally inert, doesn't hurt a thing. Animals can live in the water almost immediately after it settles. But anyways, we spread this around the pond. It was a big pond. And then he added sodium bentonite in a suspension as well. So the ionic characteristic of the liquid ionic polymer attracted sodium bentonite particles, and the liquid ionic polymer all by itself expands at a rate of 1,000 to 1. Combined with the sodium bentonite, as it was drawn into the cracks that he was trying to fill, it sort of sealed up. Now, it didn't work as good as we'd hoped, to be perfectly honest. And there was a couple, he applied it a second time afterwards again. But the pond certainly leaks a lot less, and he's satisfied. So and in that particular case, in the pond design and the machine operator, it was really hard digging, and they cut the sides of the embankments. This is my theory. They cut the sides of the embankments too steep. If there'd been a shallower grade to it, there would have been less pressure on those leak points. And I can't confirm that for certain because we're not going to go redig it again, but yeah. Now the guaranteed way to make sure a pond doesn't leak is an EPDM liner. EPDM liner is what people use a lot of times in small pond garden fixtures, and they want to hold and trap a certain amount of water. And it's kind of like a rubbery material. And it's often used on commercial roofs, on commercial flat roofs. They'll lay that out as a membrane across the entire roof to prevent anything leaking. But it's incredibly expensive, and it doesn't necessarily support a naturalized pond system very well. It can be done, but you have to layer lots of soil and things around the edges in order for plants to be able to grab hold, or you can put the plants inside baskets with soil in them, but it's not the best. We have our smallest pond up by the house was built by the previous owner and did a beautiful job. You'll see a picture of it later, and it works just fine. But on the upper pond where we built it in, our upper pond we built in sand, I knew it was going to leak. And I didn't realize how damned expensive EPDM liners. It was going to be $4,500 to line this not so big pond, you know, perhaps 25 feet by 35 feet type thing. So yeah, I had to come up with a different solution because, like my wife, I'm cheap. And I hope Carol doesn't watch this. So what I did find was something which is, I believe it's used by the fish farming industry. I'm not sure that it's being used anymore. And it's plankton bloom tarp. And basically what it is, it's a PVC tarp that's like 40 ounce. So your typical tarp that you would buy at the Home Depot or whatever is like an 8 ounce. This is a 40 ounce tarp, and it's super heavy duty. It's industrial grade. And they would use it in their processes. I don't need to describe that, but eventually they would get little tiny pinholes in them, and they would take this stuff out, these huge tarps, 240 feet by 80 feet. And they would take them out and throw them in the garbage, in the landfills. So I found a company when I was doing that big pond up top that had a bunch of these. I had them cut them down into 3 sections so that I could manage it. So roughly 80 feet by 80 feet. And had them transported over. My total cost was about $300 for all of this tarp. And I wound up selling some of it off. And in fact, later have brought in more of that tarp liner and then broken it down into smaller chunks for people to use on their properties. And I think I sold, this is 2 years ago, 10, maybe 12 liners for people's smaller pond projects. But anyway, so it worked fantastic. And I'm going to show you pictures of that. And then, of course, you have to have liners below the liners to prevent any perforation. And so perforation protection. Another way of maintaining water level inside a pond system is feeder ponds. So if you recall, I was talking to you about you have a draw and then you have that key line point and you build a pond there. Well, if you built a series of those, one pond capturing water, feeding another pond, capturing water, feeding another pond, till you finally get to the big pond or dam or whatever it is that you're trying to build. That would be a big project, but it's a way of stringing out the water supply to let you keep water for a longer period of time. And again, that's that key line design system. You're going to get algae. Can't help it. Seasonal algae blooms and passive water is perfectly normal. And there's a whole bunch of things that cause it. So like as the water warms up, the oxygen content gets reduced and there's an overabundance of nutrients that fill the pond in the fall and over the course of the winter. So like I say, the leaf litter, debris, the fir needles, the hemlock needles, the pine cones, the pollens, it all gets loaded into that water and it creates this really fervent growth of algae at certain times. And it can, the first couple of years of a pond system, it can get pretty not so nice. The last few years, our ponds, without doing anything in terms of aeration or anything, became perfectly clear. They still had a tannin sort of tea color, but the water quality was excellent. And we were swimming in them every day and all that kind of stuff. So don't panic if you build a pond and you wind up with a bit of an algae bloom. Over time, if you do the right things, it'll get far less. One of the other things though is to keep domestic ducks or geese out of the water. It's absolutely fantastic. We have a bunch of Indian runners that we use in the garden for killing slugs. And Indian runner ducks are fast little guys, hard to keep them out of the pond because they just love it. But what they do is the second they hit the water, they poop. And it's all over the place. And you can't stop that. So if you can keep the ducks out of the pond, unless you want fertilized water, that's a good thing to do. And what do we do with the fertilized water? So we build a duck pond specifically so that the ducks can jump in there. They fertilize the water. I've found bulkheads that you can actually install on as part of a tarp system to create a plumbing access point so that I can run that pipe underground and have it come up somewhere so that I actually could use the water, a fertilized water, on the gardens. It's fantastic. And it's a little bit of work, but you wind up with a great system. I'm going to talk about him more than once, but there's a gentleman by the name of Seth Holzer, and he's sort of a guru of permaculture design, doing permaculture before he even knew it was permaculture. He lives in Austria or Germany, up in the Alps. I think his property is at about 4,000 feet or 4,500 feet, but one of the things he has is a fertigation pond. And it's at the bottom of a series of string of ponds, and he lets the ducks out in that, and then he uses the water from that pond to fertilize his gardens. It's great. Recirculation techniques, pumps, aeration, and water. So recirculating pumps are, a lot of people don't want to run pumps. I was absolutely shocked at how my power bill didn't change. I have one pump that runs 24/7 all year long. And I've turned it off sometimes for a month just to see if it makes a big difference to the power bill. Costs about $1.50, $2 to run that thing. It was ridiculous. That's on the smaller pond. I have recirculation pumps on the upper pond. I also have a jet pump in a small pump house with a pressure vessel at the lower pond, the big one. And we use that pump to pump water up to the gardens so that we are irrigating with nutrient-rich water, warm water from the lower pond. And it's really good for the gardens, fantastic. And then I'll fill you in on the natural water systems, which is the plants. The whole thing is that if you build it right, it becomes its own ecosystem. And the qualities of it will change seasonally, but you wind up with a very productive system. So wetlands incorporated into your pond design are critical. And, you know, they say that as much as 30% of a pond should be dedicated to wetland. And these are shallow areas that you build into the design, like I was saying before, along the edges of the pond, also in low slope areas. And that's where things like the duckweed will grow, the irises will grow, where, oh goodness, oh, cattails. Oh, I wrote it down here. But the cattails are one of the best filters out there. There's actually research going on right now along the Mississippi Delta where they're planting cattails as a method of cleaning the water before it enters the Big Bay. Excuse me, pardon me. And so, you know, it's a fantastic filter. So is the duckweed. I also wade into those areas at certain times of the year when I want to collect material for the garden. And I use a big scythe and I cut them down and I harvest them, put them into the little wagon tractor, and I haul that up to the garden. It all becomes part of the system. And the other thing about the cattails, which is fantastic, is it's about the wildlife a little bit anyways. In the spring, when they're releasing their seed, the number of birds that go down there to collect the fluff and put it into their nests, it's just fantastic. So lots of fun around that. Yeah. And the water lilies, you don't want to buy these, by the way. If you can find them in natural sources, and I haven't found a water plant yet that doesn't reproduce prolifically. The cattails, we have small groves of them in the ponds right now. They all came from one cattail being planted, just one. And they've seeded themselves all over the shallow areas. They won't go into the deep water. And like I say, we get all the benefits from that. Yeah. So here we go. I want to talk a little bit about different methodologies for, these are more passive systems as opposed to digging a pond. So ditch systems, there's a variety of ways of actually using these. They're most often used for taking wetland areas and then trying to dry them out. So some designs call for a very steep walled set of ditches that go down 3-4 feet. And then the water seeps into that ditch line and you would take it somewhere because it'll have a little bit of a slope on it. And usually you try to move water from one really, really wet area over to, say, a pond or another area that doesn't have quite as much water. But there's ways of manipulating. And Holland and the Netherlands and places like that, I mean, they're just filled with these types of systems. Something that a lot of people don't realize is the city of Richmond is at high tide 2 or 3 feet below sea level. And they have a series of ditches that are dug strategically with pump systems to draw the water out of the soil and get it back into the river. One of the projects I worked on, there was at that point was 140 different pump stations with supervisory control and data acquisition software in there, and they were just, I just wouldn't want to be in Richmond when there's an earthquake, because it would most definitely be very wet there. So ditch systems have a purpose for sure. Now, something that looks like a ditch system, but is a different type of concept, and it's basically a passive irrigation system, is a swale line. And so if you have a bit of a slope to your land, you build the swales exactly perpendicular. So here's, I can't do it with my hands, but you build the swale line perpendicular on contour, and you excavate a small, shallow ditch, piling the dirt up on one side of it. And that's where you put all your plantings. And then when there's a major rain event, the water comes off of the topsoil and goes into the small, shallow ditch in front of your planted area, and the water collects at the root system. And it's a great way to capture water. I've got 3 swale lines on our property as part of our design. And very, very seldom have I ever even worried about trying to water them. So lots of things growing in there, including firewood trees, which is our black locust, currants, different nut trees. And it's a succession planting process. So certain plants will be smaller at one point, growing into much larger plants later, but everything is interlocked in terms of how it works together. And yeah, it's a very exciting process. And just now things are starting to really take off, because I've only built those about 4 years ago. Hugelkultur beds. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but once again, Seth Holzer was one of the guys who really brought this to fruition. And basically it's a trench that's dug into the ground. The trench is filled with large pieces of wood. Like as he was clearing his land, he wound up with all these trees, and they needed to do something with them. And so he filled them all up with big pieces of wood, smaller pieces of wood, smaller pieces of wood, then covered that in a heap with soil. And then he did all his planting on these 5-foot-high berms, basically. But as the rain falls, the wood soaks up the water and releases it during the dry periods, and it works fabulously well. So that brings us to some storage tank ideas, and I've got lots of pictures of this, but one of the organizations I work with is called ICANN, and the water security team is selling what is called an IBC tote. And these are totes that are used for transporting things like olive oil. In some cases, they transport soaps, but there's many food grade products that are transported in these, and they're quite stackable. And it's pretty easy, if you don't want to dig a pond, to actually make a series of these totes and store hundreds, if not 1,000 gallons worth of water to be used in your gardens. Something that I came across while we were traveling in Hawaii, back when we could, was something that the Hawaiians do. It was in a development that was right on top of a lava field, basically. So all these houses just situated all over this giant lava field. And they put in these above ground pools that they captured the rainwater, and then they put a cover over top of it. And the cover keeps the interior dark, so there's a minimum of algae bloom. And they use that for the non-potable water. So for the toilets and the washing and all that kind of stuff, that's what they use. And of course, they get plenty of rain all year long. And so they never really run out of water. But again, another solution of storing water above ground if you don't want to dig a pond, or you don't have enough room to dig a pond. That's another possible solution. And those things hold several thousand gallons worth of water, some of them, like a 4-foot high, 10 or 12 foot across pool, which I often see in the bargain, because I am a bargain hunter. I see you can purchase these for used for, you know, a few $100s. They'll hold 3,000 or 4,000 gallons worth of water, easy. And then the other concept which I want to talk about is the wicking beds. And wicking beds are sort of passive. It's a water storage system. And basically in my case, I'm using the IBC tote, cut in half, putting in 4-inch big old pipe with perforated on the bottom, put some landscape cloth across the top, little bed of gravel, and then the soil for planting on top of that. And the bottom of the tote is a water storage system, and it goes up to a certain level, and there's ways to control that. That's quite passive. And you plant on top, and the soil wicks the water up from the gravel to feed the plant all year long. You only need to water once a week, use a minimum of water. It's the most efficient system ever. You get incredibly high production for food out of that system, much more so than raised beds or most gardening systems. And yeah, it's a terrific way of misering your water so you don't waste it. Last slide. When you decide that you are pulling on a pond project, you want to figure out the size of it, and your excavator time is one of the more expensive elements to it. If you have a big excavation project or you want to go deep, you need a big machine. It all has to do with the size of the bucket and how much material you can move in one scoop. If you have a too small a machine, you're making hundreds of extra passes to move that same amount of dirt and taking twice as long. So if a machine is running you at $150 an hour, and they easily get up to that if you go into the bigger machines, maybe more now, you want that machine to be operating as efficiently as possible for the shortest amount of time. So, you know, here on Quadra Island, we have dozen or more operators of machines. And I think I've used just about all of them at one point or another for different parts of my projects, all the way down to little Kubota tractors with a small excavator on the back for digging trenches for pipes and for power and stuff like that. So it does matter. And most machine operators will tell you, no, sorry, that machine is too small. You might have to get this other one, or they'll say, I'm a little big for that project. Maybe you should try a smaller machine. They don't like wasting their time either, and they like to get a lot of it done as quickly as possible. So once again, treed versus cleared, that determines a lot of how much time you spend with the dig. Liners versus no liners, external systems and features, landscaping. Yeah, it's if you execute the project properly with as much forethought as you can, and I'm saying this from experience, having done it all 3 times, you can cut the cost quite a bit, and it doesn't have to be as expensive as you may think. So that's my last slide from the deck. I don't know, Lou, do we take questions now, or do I just move to the photo section?
Oh, Mike, we have all been sitting on the edges of our chairs waiting for your pictures.
Okay.
And then we'll open up for the Q&A, and we've had some really neat comments that I'll tell you about as well. So lay those pictures on us, brother.
All right, here we go.
And I loved your presentation. Just fabulous information, Mike. Thank you so much for that. I have copious notes, and my first question is, if people want to access you personally to help them create their dream pond, can I give everybody your email that asks for it?
Sure. I'm not too excited about leaving the island for Ontario, but happy to
So
do
helpful.
local projects.
Okay. Okay, that's great. So you heard it, folks. If you want to reach Mike, you can get in touch with me and I'll connect the two of you.
Okay. Now I can't see anybody, so oh, there you are. Okay, you came back. All right. So if you recall, so we have a really interesting phenomenon. I just have to set this up for you. If you're from Quadra, you'll know probably where the #1 fire hall is, and Cape Mudge Road. And it's quite bizarre. There's a series of ponds that have been created by just about every second property owner all the way down this wetland that moves towards Drew Creek. And I'm the last one. Mm-hmm. And so I know they're not holding any water back, but it's absolutely amazing, some of the ponds that have been created in that string. And I'm going to say that there's something in the order of 8 to 10 different ponds that have been developed, some small, some big. This one that I'm showing you right now, this one is huge. And you can see, yeah, it
really is. Mike, I just want to get us in touch with timing. We only have about 15 minutes to do questions and pictures. So I just wanted to put you in touch with that.
Yikes. All right, here we go. Yeah.
And folks, so if you have any questions as Mike goes, why don't you just unmute and go ahead and ask Mike directly as we go along. Just remembering that we'll wrap things up at 5 o'clock. That's in about 15 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Is that okay with you, Mike?
Yeah, sure. I'm flexible.
Okay,
so
great.
This gentleman is the person that I was telling you about that does his ponds in sections. And in this case, it's a bad time of year. You don't get the full effect of it. It's also only a year after the project. So things are looking a little less beautiful than they might, but he created this giant 18-foot deep hole here.
Wow.
And that's the amount of dirt that came out of it. Wow. So that is, kids could jump off that into the water. And these are the types. How deep
is that pond, Mike?
How big is it?
How deep did you say it was?
18 feet.
18 feet.
Yeah, it's a big, deep pond.
It looks so exotic.
Yeah, and what he does is he does it very artistically. This is one of the pathways that surrounds it. He left the edge space around the pond to naturalize. And so it's a very beautiful little walk, goes all the way around.
Oh, I love the rocks.
Yeah, that is actually a fire pit system that he built on an island in one of the ponds. This is an example of some of his dock work. This is a raised walkway, wooden walkway that goes around the back section where it's still fairly wet. But he does beautiful work. This is a massive pond, which Lou will recognize, one of her neighbors. And it's one of the biggest ones I've ever seen. And this is right after it was initially dug, the season after. He's got a great big yellow cedar deck out here. He's got terracing and gardens and very productive property. This is the original pond right in front of his house. And to give you a scale and scope, this thing is huge. That's my car.
Wow, so, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big project, but Paul's done a beautiful job.
Beautiful. We love going over there and looking at it.
Oh, for sure. And from what I know, he swims in it. And these are just all rough pictures. I'm trying to move it along because I want to show you some other stuff.
Well, what I love is the way that you're showing us the progress, because you kind of have to psych yourself up for a process, don't you, Mike?
It takes a lot, as much forethought as you can put into the project. So this is the machine that dug the upper pond system. Oh, sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit. This is one of the swale lines. There's 3 of them. And in this particular case, it was dug a little bit too deep. It needs to be a little bit shallower, but the plantings all go along on top of that. And this is about 5 years ago. Right after it was dug, we planted some of the plants. I think this is a black locust here, and covered it with mulch right away to prevent a lot of the weed propagation. And you can sort of see this is the bottom of the first swale line, second swale line, and then there's another one way over here. Yeah, that's the top one. Okay. Now, I should be getting into, okay. So roughly speaking, this is the rough dig for the upper pond, and you can see it's all sand. Look at all this sand. And there's just no way it was going to hold water. Here's the shallow area. It's about 1/4 to 1/3 of the pond. And then these are the planting shelves that go all the way around the entire edge of the pond, where we put all kinds of plants in. Here you can see where the swale attaches to it. So in fact, if there was an overflow, which there never has been, it would actually run into the pond. So,
Mike, again, that's looking like some clay, or is that still sand?
No, it is sand. It is like golf course Bermuda sand. It's absolutely wonderful.
Really?
Yeah. And so here's the pond now that it's been raked out and smoothed out a little bit. And you can see some of the rock features that were built in. And here's the waterfall system. As it goes down, it cascades over a whole bunch of rocks which haven't been installed. That's the pile over in the corner. And all kinds of plants built into that. Yeah. Here's the tarps that I was talking about. And the other thing that I had to do is I didn't want to buy a liner for this great big pond. So what I did was I chased the carpet layers around in Campbell River for a whole week and a half. And as they ripped out old, dirty, smelly, yucky carpets, I piled them into my truck, and then I would bring them home. And I collected about 4,500 square feet of carpeting. That went into the bottom of this pond here, and then one tarp, and then another tarp. And these things were huge. Like I said, 80 feet by 80 feet roughly. And so I had pulleys attached to the trees over on this side of the pond, with attached to pull links on the tarps. And then the rope went through, and then I drove the truck the other way, and it yanked the tarp all the way across the pond. And we did 2 layers of that.
Now, Mike, can I ask you a question about the material use?
Yeah.
Is there ever any cause for you to feel concerned about like plastic residuals that would come from any of these kinds of materials?
Well, you should think about that. This stuff is indestructible. I don't see that it would leach that much. Plus, I've kind of put a small thin layer of dirt all over the whole thing, and rocks and stuff like that. So it allows the pond to be naturalized on its own, especially with all the leaf litter that falls from the alder trees that are right next door to it. But this pond does not leak. Like, I might lose 4 inches of water all the way through the whole summer to evaporation.
And this is still the sandy site that we're looking at? So if it had been more clay, I guess it would be a different ballgame altogether, eh?
Well, and this is giving you an example of the lower pond system, where the excavation was largely in hard pan, and you're seeing it at different levels of the construction process. I think I got these somewhat out of order, but you can see the dock here. This is where the little pump house is. There's a pipe that goes all the way from the pump house up the side of the property, all the way to the upper pond. So I can actually fill the upper pond from the lower pond if I want. Plus there's another pipe that goes all the way up here underground over to the garden system.
Lovely.
There's the big machine. And you'll start to get a sense of how big this thing is. This is our camping island in the middle of the pond. This area over here is about 12 feet deep. We call that Amoeba Bay. There's a planting shelf all the way around the edges here so that we can put in all kinds of plants and things. It all looks pretty rough right now, but you'll see that it turns out okay over time. And then this is it filling up. So when we connected with this ditch from the first pond to this pond, it just sort of filled itself up to about halfway. And then over the period of about a year and a half, all the runoff and leaching in from the regular water flow system filled it the rest of the way. And I have a culvert at a low point that allows the water to continue to travel on down its normal natural course. This is the pond. This gives you a better perspective of how big this, from here to here is about 100 feet. From here to there is about 150, almost 200 feet. The site in total is close, well, it's a little over an acre, I suppose. And you can see that we've got some plantings in here. We've got blueberry bushes all the way along here. Just every kind of plant you can imagine, all the way around, different willows that we use for projects. They're planted along the water's edge. And let's see, where do we go here? Okay, now this is it starting to green up.
Wow.
But you can see that it's still not full at this point. So this is the following summer. We did that last dig in the fall.
But this is just like a year later?
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
There's the camping island with a little bit of TLC. You can see a lot of the big trees that we're taking down there that became firewood. Here's all our plantings starting to go in. This culvert system, that's three 2-foot rings. So it's about 4 feet deep there. And that became the center for a bridge to span to the island. I've got some other ones I want to show you. So this is another dig. This was off of Smith Road. And here the gentleman, he just wanted to have a place to hang out with his dog. So he built himself a little bunkie and a nice little pond out in the forest. Pretty clever little design. And here's one where we remember I was describing about how he wanted to collect power. So he has this automatic siphon tube set up that takes the water from this pond as it fills up in the wintertime. This is early on. It doesn't look like this anymore. And that goes down to where he's got a powerhouse down below, about 100 foot of elevation drop. And that's how he powers his home, his off-grid home during the winter. This is a natural inflow stream, and that's how much water he's got coming in. And he has plans to put, it's a sort of on a key line design, but he's planning about 4 more small ponds to secure his water over the summer months. This is still the same shot. That's the siphon system. It's quite clever. It actually starts itself automatically. He doesn't have to do anything once it fills up. And here's a very naturalized pond. That's what they start to look like after a while. Very pleasant spots.
And you said that a few pictures back, that was someone who was completely off grid?
Yeah. He's his house is about 20 feet from a power pole, but he doesn't like paying BC Hydro. So there you go. He's got solar panels. He's got generators. Yeah. Now this is an older established pond, but you can see it's largely a recreation site. You can see it's still pretty fresh over there, but did a nice job of building it out. And this is one of the ponds that's in that series of ponds that makes its way all the way down to our place. You can see he put a lot of docks and play stuff for the grandkids in there. It's quite park-like.
Beautiful.
This is a ditch system that supplies water to one of the main ponds. That actually goes back to one of the very first ones. All right, I'm moving fast here. But you can see how there's so many places to retreat and reflect and relax and watch nature. Now this is actually a deep ditch system to try and dry out all of this land. And you can see that it doesn't have to be something that's ugly. because it fills in with all kinds of plant life over a period of time. And it was very successful in removing a great deal of the water from this land so that he could get some use out of that. I'm not sure if he has horses or something, but it's a cross-ditching system to move the water away from one particular area. Let's see. Okay, this is another ditch system, and you can see that it feeds here. This land over on the left-hand side was, you almost could not walk in there. It was so wet. When we looked at, when the purchasers of that home wanted to buy that property. And so this is one of the first things that I recommended they went ahead with. They created a ditch system, and the water just seeps slowly, naturally out of that into a pond. And then there's another ditch that's on the far left that goes to another pond. So they're capturing a lot of water, and they use that for their gardening. Yeah, another example of it. And you got to keep the critters out, so you have to fence it. I don't know why I took that picture. Okay, so this is our pond, greened up quite a bit. And I don't know if you recognize the flower that's in the foreground on that picture. It's called a lily. And we went for a walk around the ponds to take some pictures for this talk, and Lily just photobombed me all the way around.
Oh, thank goodness. What a beautiful flower.
At any rate, here's the naturalized waterfall feature into the upper pond. And it actually works pretty good.
That's a gorgeous picture with her reflection.
And then that's the swale after it has, again, naturalized, and some of the trees and plantings have grown a little bit bigger, and it's quite productive, actually. This is one of the shallow areas in the pond, and you can see that the water quality is a little bit lower right now because well, it's just that time of year, but come summer, that water will be clear.
Wow.
And there you can see some of the rock work that I had to put in, and then there's plantings all the way around the edge here.
Lovely.
And that's the power point for the pumps. Another set of bridges. I'm actually going to keep firing through these, Lou, because there's a few slides.
Well, I think we want to see all of them. We'll go over by just a few minutes.
Okay. There you can see the bridge section using those old culverts that were, somebody had filled them full of dirt, and we took the dirt out and moved them down there and put them into the pond. And there's Lily at the fire pit on the camping island. And this all greens right up. It's beautiful. Anybody know what this is?
Is that Joe Pye weed?
No, it's Japanese butterbur.
Oh.
And it gets leaves that are, the leaves are like 2 feet across. And it's a fantastic spot if you're looking for frogs, and it makes the whole pond area look like Jurassic Park. The frogs hang out underneath the bottom of these leaves, and it's pretty cool.
It must be so magical for the children and adults too.
Everybody loves it. Now, this is the upper swimming pond in the summer, and you can see I created a little beach feature and an upper little viewing area. And the water quality wasn't quite there yet, but yeah. And then there's also a shallow planting area where we grow mint and all kinds of stuff there. And a little bit of that. Now, here's the aerial shots. So here you can see, this will start to tie in the whole system. So we have the swale lines here within the shade line. We have the upper pond with the beach area. Carol's garden systems all here, chicken coop. The big green area here, this is, it's not grass, but it is grass. It's more like a hay field, and I allow that to grow to about 2 feet, as well as in between each of the swale lines. And then I harvest that with a scythe. That becomes materials for the gardens as well as for the animals. a little closer up view of the garden system. And it's, as usual, it's expanded again. This is the lower pond system. Here's the camping island, and you can see the pond. This is the canal that goes and connects the two together. And I've just bent the rebar. I want to put that across this canal and get the blackberries to grow on it. And it'd be a lot like a system that they used to use in Mexico called, I think they're called chinapas. I'm probably saying it wrong. And they would harvest the food on these vines and things that grew over the canals from the boats as they went up and down the canals.
Clever.
So, yeah, it's fun. So now you can sort of see the whole thing is all interconnected. We've got the pipeline that goes up this side underneath the road over to here for filling the pond. We've got a pipeline up here to the upper gardens area, providing water for the domestic systems. And I have ambition, but I don't know when I'm going to do it, where I want to create an underground pipe that goes underneath this road here and then comes up in a naturalized ditch and meander down through here and act as a small waterfall to feed right back in. So if I put a solar powered pump here, it'll come on automatically, and this waterway will actually trickle down to this pond, creating a complete loop.
Oh, and wow.
It'll come
on. That sounds like we should be plugging you into the schedule for next year, and you can update us on that.
Yeah, okay. Now, here's the IBC totes, and this is what they look like untampered. And so what I've been doing is I cut these in half, and then in the bottom of that is where the big old pipe goes, and then laid over with the landscape cloth, then a little bit of gravel, and then I'll show you how that works from there. That's an IBC tote. And ICANN sells these, sorry, I'll tell you that in a minute. Now this particular setup is actually two of those totes tied together with an 8-inch wide sitting ledge. And this is a beautiful little setup because it's actually wheelchair accessible just by reaching over, and you can harvest your food right from there, or you can sit on the ledge and it's no bending over to collect your foods. Imagine that you've got a tomato plant or something in there that's sitting another 3 or 4 feet. You just walk up to it and pluck whatever it is you need for food. And this one is intended for a demonstration at the new seniors residence, where they're going to put several normal raised beds, food production beds, at the residence. And then this one will be an actual wicking bed, and we'll be able to do a proof of concept check to see how well does this system perform against a standard gardening bed.
That looks amazing.
And then this is what it looks like if I just took scrap materials like old roofing and things like that and just placed that up on the outside, just to get rid of the industrial look of the units. And this is the water column pipe that determines the depth of the water inside the wicking bed system. And if you try to overfill this, it'll automatically just come out the bottom and come out the pipe at the top there. And then you can turn this 90 degrees in the wintertime and drain the system entirely. And this is the 4th pond. Final slide, if I'm not mistaken. And this is what, this is just an ornamental pond. It's about 4 feet deep. There's about 800 gallons worth of water in it. And it hasn't started its process of eating up the nutrients in it. These plants will all green up. But it's a little waterfall system. It's a nice feature. It's right by the house. And that's it.
It's gorgeous. Oh, Mike, thank you so much. Your passion is inspiring. You're teaching us about ponds is just fabulous. Thank you for going through things so systematically and then showing us the pictures. I'm thrilled, and I hope that you'll keep us updated. There were a few questions that we didn't get to, so I'm going to invite the people who asked those questions, Sherry Peterson about the pump and so forth, just fire me off an email and I will forward any questions that didn't get answered in Mike's presentation to Mike directly. Mike, thank you again. We're just thrilled. I loved everything about your presentation. I'm definitely inspired. Lee has been wanting to get another pond going, and I think we are, it's like having another child or something, you know? It's a big deal.
No, so that's just Lee.
Thank you so much for being with us. Everyone, thank you for joining us on Gabbing About Gardening. Next week, next Monday, same time, same place, we will have Justice Shanfarber, my son, and his life partner, Sue Angle. They're going to be gabbing about creating an urban food forest garden. Yeah. And this will be this is a perennial garden. There'll be lots of pictures, maybe even a live tour. That's next Monday, same time, same place. Gabbing About Gardening is always free. Thank you very much to Bruce and Bruno and others who have contributed today. Your contributions are greatly appreciated. And I want to tell you about a new radio show, Gabbing About Gardening radio show, every Tuesday. So that's tomorrow at 11:30 on Cortez Radio, 89.5 FM. We will be interviewing Michael Abelman about his book, Street Farm, Growing Food, Jobs, and Hope on the Urban Frontier, as well as our own Mark Dahl will be joining us talking about soil health. Adam Schick will be talking about phenology, and Jennifer Banks-Dahl is going to tell us how we can get kids in the garden. Thank you for joining us. See you next week. Mike, I'd like to give our guest teacher the final word. Just one parting word of advice to send us off today.
Well, all I can say is thank you very much for this opportunity. And I hope something in this presentation was enlightening. There's so much to talk about. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you would like to have a Fire Smart evaluation of your property, please get in touch with me. I want to make this island as fireproof as we can make it.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week. Now go out there and get dirty. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Mike, thank you again. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye. See you next week, I hope.